You were here with By the Cover. Today I'll be reviewing The Chain by Adrian Mckinty. This book was 352 pages and took me 2 days to read. I would rate it a 7.5 out of 10. This review will contain spoilers, so if you do not want to hear those, click off now. The synopsis. The Chain follows Rachel Klein, a mother whose 13-year-old daughter, Kylie, is abducted. To get Kylie back, Rachel must pay a ransom and kidnap someone else's child, becoming part of an ongoing, ruthless criminal chain. I was really looking forward to reading this book. The synopsis and general idea of the book sounded very interesting to me. Unfortunately, the beginning of the book, around the first 80 pages, were very hard for me to get through. There were two things that contributed to me not liking this portion of the book. You were immediately thrown into a high-stakes situation with characters you do not know. While this is great for a thriller, it also means that you are not connected to any of these characters, so the outcome of the situation I wasn't very invested in. Secondly, this portion of the book is primarily dominated by one person's POV. In other words, it's a lot of inner monologue, which can get very boring. The first 80 pages of this book had me struggling to stay awake, and I actually ended up DNFing this book for several months. I decided to pick the book back up, and I'm really glad that I did. The exact part where I left off is where the book started to get good. The difference between the portion I didn't like and the part that I did was the introduction of Pete's character. Pete is a flawed character, but a generally good guy. I find him to be the most interesting character in the book, but with him thrown into the mix, now the primary character had someone else to play off in the book. This made me like the primary character and the book a lot more from that point forward, as it got significantly more interesting seeing that dynamic. The other character that stood out to me in this book was Kylie, who was Rachel's daughter. I usually hate child characters because they are typically relegated to being utterly useless and whiny. However, Kylie was her own person and had a strong will to survive. She was intelligent and kept calm for the most part. It was very refreshing to see, and I was rooting for her throughout the book. I liked that the book explored the trauma response after the events. This is where the emotional impact of the book lies and is strongest. The backstory of the villains was interesting, and I really enjoyed the ending of this book. As far as my dislikes of the book, you can expect this from a thriller, but for the most part the character work is pretty weak. There is some very surface level exploration of these characters and why they are the way they are, but the story is very plot driven rather than character focused. I don't fault the book for this, given that it is a thriller, which is typical of thrillers, but I would have liked to have spent a bit more time with the characters and deep diving into them. I've already mentioned at the beginning of the story, so I won't do that again. There was a plot point that didn't make a lot of sense to me. There is a character that you meet around 3/4 of the way through the book named Eric. Eric was a super paranoid character who took every precaution and was smart about the way he moved, since he assumed the people from the chain would be watching him. Yet his story arc ends because he overlooked one of the most basic and obvious ways that surveillance would have taken place. This seemed like a big oversight in the storytelling. While I liked the antagonists, I think one of the twists at the end of the book was very, very obvious. This did not affect my enjoyment of the book, however, as the plot didn't really depend on the twist, and nothing was really spoiled from figuring it out early. The book had a rough start, but eventually turned into a very compelling thriller that I think was worth the read. That's about it. We'll catch you later.